They all disputed the truth of the accusation. Obama is not a Muslim, they said, but none of them, not the media, not the surrogates, not the senator who wanted to be president, ever questioned the premise that there is something wrong about being a Muslim, something that is incompatible with being the president, something that is indeed incompatible with being an American. I am not suggesting that the era that ended on September 11, 2001 was a promised land for Muslim Americans, or any other Americans when I say this, but still, before that awful morning, I think, Muslims were on the path to full assimilation in the American mainstream. They were following a route that has been blazed for them by Jewish, Irish, German, Polish, and Italian Americans. They were on the road to becoming themselves something unremarkable, just another thread in the American tapestry. And I think if someone had suggested on September 10th that a Muslim might become president, there might have been some pushback, but and there might even have been some bigotry. But I think there would have been a sizable number of Americans who said, as they said of John F. Kennedy in 1961, so what? I don't care about his faith. I've got questions about his economic policy. I think there would be fewer such voices today. Indeed, I think there would probably be almost none. This is the unsung tragedy of September 11 and of its aftermath. This is the unspoken casualty. The assimilation of Muslim Americans was set back by a generation at least. And we find ourselves instead embarked upon a new era in which the unfitness of American Muslims, the dangerousness and the untrustworthiness of them is a premise no one even bothers to question. It is something old hat, unremarkable, part of the wallpaper, barely worthy of notice. As in a churchwoman who blithely assured me a couple years ago that at present birth rates, Muslims will take over this country within the next 20 years. Just for the Politico.com has crunched those numbers, and if that's true, then y'all are lagging because need to be busier. But anyway, she did not say why she thought that this was a bad thing. She didn't say why she thought this was a bad thing. That seemed to be understood by everyone at the table. Or as in NBC anchorman Brian Williams, asking candidate Obama about rumors that he was, quote unquote, trying to hide the fact that he is a Muslim. Nowhere in his question did Williams establish why it would be wrong if Obama was a Muslim. He did not need to. Or as in the conservative pundit Dennis Prager, saying that your own representative, Michigan Representative Keith Ellison, that his decision to take his oath of office with his hands on a Koran undermines American civilization, quote unquote. He did not say why this was so. Apparently the threat to American civilization was considered self-evident. Or as in Glenn Beck, later greeting Congressman Ellison by saying, "Sir, quote, sir, prove to me that you are not working with our enemies." He is not known to have required such proof from any other American lawmaker. Only the scary Muslim required that treatment. It is the rote nature of this. It is the taken for grantedness of it that should bother us. It is the unspoken supposition underlying it that makes the hairs at the nape of the neck stand up at attention. We all know Muslims are dangerous. We all know. Beg your pardon, but as an African American, history has taught me to be leery of the things we all know. History has taught me to be wary of the things that people can do on the basis of what we all know. Japanese Americans are apparently leery too. They, of course, have a cultural memory of having their homes and their businesses taken away, of being imprisoned behind barbed wire at places like Manzanar, Poston, and Hart Mountain back in the days after Pearl Harbor when we all knew you couldn't trust a Jap. And then there was something of historical moment. There was some sense of the past shaking its finger at the future when Representative Mike Honda, a Japanese American who spent time in one of those camps as a child, denounced the current climate of paranoia and suspicion as embodied in the recent hearings on Muslim radicalization by your friend and mine, Representative Peter King. What is happening to Muslims, said Representative Honda, is, quote, something similarly sinister to what happened to the Japanese when he was a child. He said, quote, I'll be damned if I'm going to stay quiet and not say something. We have to show people that as Americans, we're not going to put up with that kind of nonsense. If you have any comprehension of American history, you cannot help but to share his sense of disbelief and of moral outrage. If you've ever read a history book, you cannot escape a nagging feeling of, as Yogi Berra put it, deja vu all over again. I have to tell you, lately, I find myself sort of choking on my own naivety. Because you see, I've read those history books, I've read more than a few, and I'm one of those Americans who came of age in the modern and enlightened era of the 1970s, giving thanks that because we were so modern and enlightened, we would never again do something as outrageous as put our fellow Americans behind barbed wire because of their nationality, or embark upon a terror campaign against our own citizens. Are you now or have you ever been? Or ruin lives and careers in the search for supposed communists. We would never again succumb to paranoid delusions born of irrational fear. We had learned our lesson. We laughed at the absurdities of those earlier eras. We were children of the 1970s, dancing in our polyester leisure suits under disco balls, and all that crazy stuff was over. All of that happened yesterday. Then you wake up in 2011, and you listen to the radio, or you turn on the television, or you fire up the computer, and you are shocked, because suddenly it is yesterday once more. All that has changed is the names. Muslims now instead of commies and Japs. I think there is in all of us when we are young, there's this temptation to believe that we are living at the end of history. We look back at the terrible things that happened in the dreadful long ago. Look back at forced sterilization, or at segregated buses, or at eugenic murders. We look back at child labor and sweatshops, and at poll taxes, and at signs that read, "No dogs or Irish need apply." We look back at the lives our people once lived and the things that they once were forced to endure, and we shudder, wondering, how could they have done those things? How could they have lived that way back then? Then we congratulate ourselves that that is long ago in the past, and we're living beyond those things. It has always been a childish and naive conceit. Over the last decade, it has become a childish and naive conceit that we can no longer afford to indulge. People tend to have this belief that time brings about change. I remember exchanging emails with one of my readers who insisted that there's no way slavery in this country, he said slavery in this country would have ended even without the Civil War. And I asked him why. What makes him think the end of slavery was somehow preordained? I could have lived with it if he had talked about how the economic forces would have eventually killed what they call the peculiar institution. But instead he responded by telling me, well, this is the 21st century, and there's no way Americans living in the 21st century would have allowed that to go on. And I asked him, why not? There is slavery right now in Africa. There is slavery in Asia. Until about 1945, there was de facto slavery here in the United States, where sheriffs would arrest black men on bogus charges and then sell them to business owners who paid their jail costs. So why could there not be slavery in this country right up until this very minute? What is it that makes this time so special that something like that could never happen? People think that change happens in time, but Martin Luther King once said, time is neutral. Time doesn't change a thing. It is people who make change in time. And if America has not kept its promise, maybe it is time that we understood that the work toward this promise was going on before you and I got here, and it will be underway long after we are gone. There will always be a need to push America to keep its promise, always be a need to help America be. It is, by definition, a never-ending process. But the point is that we are ennobled in the trying and in the striving. That's what matters, not the finishing, but the making progress, piling up some accomplishments and then handing those off to our children so that they can do their part to help America be. And on, always striving forward, always reaching, trying to build what our founders called a more perfect union. And the plain truth is, Muslims have lost so much ground in that struggle since September 11. A Pew Research Center survey conducted in August of last year found that just 30% of Americans hold a favorable impression of American Muslims. and that was down 11 percentage points from 2005 when the figure stood at 41%. Now, granted, the survey last year was conducted at the height of the controversy over the so-called terror mosque,